Welcome to your Friday edition of Forecast Lab. The weather here in Texas probably best described as spectacular sunsets and lots of wind. Some areas around the Dallas-Fort Worth area got gusts to near 60 miles an hour, and that wind has been pretty much all over the southern plains. The winds follow this powerful system currently in the Appalachian region, and behind it, a very strong pressure gradient, a very large volume of cold air coming down from Canada and modifying as it passes over the relatively warm terrain. The triple point to this system is around Cape Hatteras. That's pretty much where the northwestern tip of the warm air is, and as the air flows over this warm front, it ascends. And we get this vast area of showers, rain, and a few thunderstorms. Further back to the west, we have this occlusion around the Cincinnati area. You can see, looking at the thickness lines, that there's just not very many of those thickness lines passing through that occlusion. So it is decoupled from the stronger thickness gradients out to the east, and that leaves us with a cold core low over Ohio. Further out to the west, some lee side troughing in the high plains, and then as we go further to the northwest, we pick up this new Pacific system, classic antifront setup with the precipitation back behind that cold front, very common in the western U.S., and we can see some cooler air back behind that 30s and 40s, and even some snow in the interior regions of British Columbia. Kind of ironic, that's that region that got 121 degrees in June, and now they're down to 28, probably the coldest reading throughout southern Canada. Taking a look out in the Pacific, it's been stormy out there. Let me find my scroll bars here. There we go. Our tour takes us out west. High pressure for a change. That's off the Washington coast. And as we get towards the Aleutians, the Gulf of Alaska, we have a new 974 millibar system. Further up to the north, it's looking like winter, teens and 20s in Alaska. And then checking out Canada, Hudson Bay system, lots of snow and rain throughout the northern part of the Hudson Bay Basin, but the temperatures are relatively mild, still looking at 20s and 30s up north, and we're going to start seeing a change over to single digits and teens because that's what we expect this time of year. Things are going to cool down there in the weeks ahead. Checking out the Pacific, looks pretty quiet, a intrusion of maritime polar air flowing southward, and then going back to the south, we pick up this outgoing system south of Newfoundland, and just kind of a mild, quiet day across much of Maine with north winds. You know, it's been a long time since we looked at the air masses using the 850 millibar temperature anomaly. This is up at about 5,000 feet. It kind of gets away from the diurnal effects, the variations in the boundary layer conditions, so we can really see where the cold air masses stand out, such as over the southern U.S., this chunk of cold air moving southeast into Florida. And out in the Gulf of Alaska, the North Pacific, quite a bit of cold air spiraling around, and you can see that slug there coming for the west coast, powerful cold front around Sunday, and here comes another surge of cold air southward through the southern plains. Meanwhile, up to the north, strong downsloping in the McKenzie River Delta and the Brooks Range and the North Slope. And a lot of that warm air extends out into the western Arctic, so that'll perpetuate the mild weather in that part of the continent. So going into next week, cold air flowing south into the Great Lakes region. That's it right there. And stormy once again out in the North Pacific. And up to the north, the downslope gets even stronger. So probably some 30s and 40s, maybe even some 50s out there in the Northwest Territories. Going towards the end of next week, very strong push of cold air approaching the west coast. Mild through the central U.S. and cold in the northeast. Here comes some more cold air coming southward around next weekend. And then going into the following week, the first full week of November looks cold in the eastern U.S. and pretty turbulent and stormy in the west coast region. And hurricane season winding down very rapidly going into November. And we're seeing things pretty clear out there. The main threat areas, nothing of note. And the 5-day outlook looks pretty quiet. So this could very well be it for the 2021 hurricane season. It's not over until we get to the end of November, really. But so far it's looking pretty good. And for our convective forecast SPC, just going for a marginal risk near that triple point. Most of this is all going to be embedded stuff, and I'm not really looking for much severe weather potential. The storm reports, yeah, that's looking pretty clear there. The visible satellite imagery showing that dramatic system in the eastern U.S. Going back over the fronts, we had that cold front running about something like that. Warm front about here in the occlusion, coming back around towards Cincinnati. The 850 and 700 millibar lows, I think they're in this area here. I see a bit of spiraling in the cloud field right about there. Looks like the dry slot is well out towards the east. And let's take a look at the water vapor imagery. So this shows that this globular look is mostly tied up with the occlusion and the main baroclinic region of that system right down here. That's where your moisture is. Let's run that animation. You can see that dry slot punching across Jacksonville up the coast towards Cape Hatteras. I think there's certainly a chance that that cold front could be a little bit further south, looking at this satellite presentation. But one thing that's pretty neat is we can see some vortices embedded in this flow here. There's a good one around Chattanooga. And I think there could be a couple of others maybe around Illinois down towards Paducah. Taking a look at the visible imagery elsewhere around the country, looks like we have some moisture trapped in the San Joaquin Valley, starting to see the appearance of stratus and fog, which is definitely a cold season pattern. Moving up to Northern California and Oregon, well, we've got snow-peaked caps on the Sierra Nevada. Also, the antifront, there it is, the cloud shield associated with that, and also some mountain waves due to the fast flow traversing that area. Then up in the Portland, Seattle area, we get on the backside of that frontal system. Lots of low cloud through the Cascades back out towards the coastal range, and more standing waves. And here it's due to the prevailing west-northwest flow coming in from the Pacific. A picture-perfect day across the northern plains. Looks like some residual fog and stratus in Minnesota. Same thing in Nebraska. We catch the backside of that system there in the eastern U.S. You can see some herringbone patterns in that cloud field. That's indicative of fast flow and probably some shear in the lower levels. Same thing in Kansas and Oklahoma. Arkansas and Missouri showing a lot of cold air advection stratus and stratocumulus. And down in Texas, the same thing. The winds are starting to weaken a little bit, but not before triggering a few wildfires. That looks like a range fire out around maybe Throckmorton. I do want to take you back and show you the winds yesterday. This is going to be around 3 p.m. yesterday on Thursday. Widespread 30 to 40 knot sustained winds and gusts of 40 to 50 knots. Wichita, Dallas-Fort Worth, and Oklahoma City and Tulsa, those were some of the hardest hit areas. And moving forward into today, You can see that it's still windy, hanging on to 30-knot gusts in Texas. However, looking elsewhere around the country, we're probably done with that wind. Most of that has moved off into the Gulf of Mexico. Probably not great for the oil workers out on those platforms, but that is what we have for today. Well, this has the look of cold air advection stratocumulus moving on to the western Florida coast, and that's behind that front. Let me check out the surface map. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, the front is down to the south. That dry slot that we saw earlier was punching the backside of that front pretty much right over the cold air transition zone. So that all looks good. So the front way down here. On the east coast, we're pretty close to that large occlusion, which is a cold core system. And surface heating and cold core systems usually mean shallow cumulonimbus, like what we see here in the Carolinas. Showery weather in that part of the country. And then going further north, this is pretty much all along the occlusion, or I should say the occluded front, curving around back towards Ohio. And there's still quite a bit of isentropic lift taking place up and around the periphery of that occluded front. And that's probably a good place to stop right there, showing a little bit of that dry slot, residual low-level moisture and destabilization in the boundary layer, and it appears some dry air got entrained all the way back around into the Ohio River Basin. Some showers breaking out where we have that warming, that very strong air mass modification taking place, and here and there a few vortices, one right there, and I think there might be another. I don't know, I thought we had one in this area on the water vapor imagery, but anyway, very complex pattern this afternoon. And let's take a look at our temperature records for today. These are going to be the max temperatures, the afternoon highs. Looking pretty warm up in Montana, near 70. Also Tucson coming up to 91 degrees. None of these are records, but they do come close. Also Miami coming up to 87. And then we have 58 in Mississippi for a high. That's a very cold high temperature. It's not breaking any records, but it's coming pretty close, showing that that is definitely a cold day for this time of year. And then here we have the daily max and min for Saturday. There's only two values here. Needles with 89 coming up near the record, and 86 at Del Rio coming up near the record, but there is not any indication of record lows. So that tells us that the temperatures we're getting across the entire U.S. this weekend are very seasonable. Exactly what we would expect this time of year. In fact, look at Sunday, Halloween. No records, and we're not even coming close to any records anywhere. And the same thing for Monday, the first day of November. No records to talk about. So this is exactly the kind of weather we expect this time of year. And that's all for our Friday edition of Forecast Lab. I will be back on Wednesday. I will be taking Monday off. Monday is usually the supporter video day. We've had a death in the immediate family. My maternal grandmother passed at the age of 97. We're having to put our mind on the funeral and all that, so we're going to put the Forecast Lab series on hold until I come back, and that'll be on Wednesday. And I hope we'll see you back here then. Hope you all have a great weekend and a great Halloween. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.